Welcome, everybody. This is panel number 2. I'm Jeff Mayers from WISPolitics.com and WISBusiness.com. This panel is going to discuss how to manage increased demand caused by new technologies, including AI. And we can just talk about increased demand in general. We talked a little bit about that in panel 1, but I think we have a little different array of panelists here. And so I think we'll be able to approach it in a different way. So let me introduce the panelists. You know Bert Garvin from the WEC Energy Group, Teresa Mogensen from ATC, Mark O'Connell, who runs the Wisconsin Counties Association, and Carl Hosley, he's the president of Xcel Energy Wisconsin, Michigan, and Todd Stewart is executive director of the Wisconsin Industrial Energy Group. But let me just ask everybody to start off with here. You know, AI is like bursts onto the scene. You know, you can't go to any conference and not hear about it. But the energy demand out of AI and all these new technologies is enormous. And I'm just wondering, from all of your standpoints, you know, I'm going to start with the utility folks here first. How do you, as a utility, anticipate all this demand from new technologies, and how has it changed your planning?
It's a good question, Jeff. Huge demand for data centers, right? And the race for AI superiority is certainly on. And I've heard some of the major players say that if you're not in the top 3, you can expect to be gobbled up. So they're looking to bring these assets on as soon as possible. Of course, that changes our resource modeling, how quickly we can meet their needs. And, you know, they're not looking for interruptible service. These are customers that are going to be high load factor, 90% load factors, that want their energy relatively soon. And they want it without interruption, right? So the change is really how do we meet these needs and continue down the clean energy transition without sacrificing reliability, never safety, right? These are table stakes in our industry, and still be able to meet that load. We still have an obligation to serve, of course. So there's different ways we can do it, right? Use the existing sources that we have, uprating those existing sources. We have a robust nuclear fleet here at Xcel Energy that we've extended the lives. We continue to grow our renewable resources and wind and solar, and we believe that natural gas is an important bridge fuel that we're going to need, especially as these large demand loads come online and are pressuring our systems, Jeff.
Yeah, we'll drill down a little bit on, you know, managing demand, but just let's starting off with, you know, how these new technologies, AI, I think being the biggest one to come on the scene recently, are really, you know, changing the outlook big time. So, Bert, how is WC Energy Group anticipating and planning for this?
Well, we're continuing to focus on reliability. To Carl's point, data centers and cloud infrastructure requires a high level of reliability. So that's job one. It always will be. It's much larger. I mean, Microsoft has purchased over close to 1,400 acres of property, and construction is underway for a major data complex in southeast Wisconsin. And we're working closely with the commission and stakeholders of Microsoft on that project. And again, whether you're in Carl's service territory or ours, the emphasis of making sure it's reliable, and for the customer, it's speed to market. Because Carl's right, this is a major race between highly sophisticated tech companies, and they need reliability and they need speed to market, and we're trying to accommodate both.
Right. It's about economic growth too, right? I mean, you know, if Microsoft says, "Hey, you know, we want to locate in your territory," you're going to try to accommodate them. Oh, okay. Teresa, what about, again, you know, you're not generating it, you're transmitting it. But, you know, again, if you have new technologies, new data centers, that places a stress on the system.
Absolutely. It's increased load, and we call it kind of point load when you've got a real concentrated draw in one spot. So just like anything else that we've been talking about, whether it's new generation and injecting in the grid or new load taking off the grid, it makes changes to the patterns of power flow, and then we have to be responsive to our utility generators who are going to figure out how to serve that customer, and then how the grid needs to respond to be able to deliver it is another key. And oftentimes too, the data centers take service at high voltages because they consume so much. So then it's making sure the transmission infrastructure is in place so they can even connect to the grid. And so part of that challenge then is figuring out, well, where are they going to go? And as we talked in the last panel, we've got a real time factor associated with building new transmission. So we don't want that to be the lag to this, good new load connecting and good economic development opportunity connecting. So to the extent we could do some previews of where should it go, that could be helpful in figuring out what and where the transmission should be to support it.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Teresa. Todd Stewart of the Wisconsin Industrial Energy Group. Welcome, Todd. What's your take on the demand surge, if you will, from new technologies and AI?
Well, it's a real curveball. I mean, one thing that's I think is really extraordinary is that, and it's not just a Wisconsin phenomenon, in a lot of places in the country, but Wisconsin has had relatively flat load for 20 some odd years, roughly. You go back to 2005, 2006, we had pretty much the same demand megawatts. There was a hot summer, I think, in 2012 maybe, but other than that, it's been flat for like 20 years due to a number of things, the economy in general, decline of manufacturing getting more efficient, less heavy industry, people using different technology at home. So it's a bit of a curveball to all of a sudden see loads, in the hundreds of megawatts range dropping into some of these service territories. Obviously Carl does in Minnesota, has major new load that was just announced, and obviously in southeastern Wisconsin we've got some significant new load that we're looking at. And not only that, but obviously we're part of a big footprint in the Midwest, and there have been concerns in recent years with all the rising peak demand, seeing the peak demand rising for a variety of factors, a lot of generator retirements in the region, extreme weather events, all kind of adds up at the same time. And so to be taking on new load growth is, again, it's a bit of a curveball and a concern too. I mean, just looking at public documents, I think there is a concern when you look at reserve margins in certain areas of the state where it's like, okay, this is where some large units are about to be shut down, and this is the growth, here's the current load that we have, even if we don't have any growth. But if we have significant growth, you could be really eating into some of the reserve margins in the next couple of years. And so I applaud the commission for opening up the docket on resource adequacy, and for those who are less into our jargon, the reliability of the system. I am a little concerned that we get this like, okay, well, we got to hurry up and meet all this new demand, hurry up, pass our plan. Otherwise the lights will go out and we'll lose Microsoft or whatever. We got to be careful, because the other part is, we've had high rates for 20 years straight. And, there's not the margin of safety as far as, how we control rates and things like that is, certain utilities are higher than others, but we had pretty darn high rates for the last 20 years that we've been dealing with. So the balance and how you meet that load is going to be a real challenge coming up. So I would urge the commission to maybe accelerate that resource adequacy docket, because once these plants shut down, things could get pretty tight given the load growth that might be happening.
Okay, we'll come back to the utility folks on Todd's worries. I just want to get Mark O'Connell with the Counties Association to sort of weigh in on the demand surge and what it could mean.
Yeah, I think it's artificial intelligence. I think is going to turn everything upside down. It is coming on very quickly. I'm not even sure that we can even fathom all of the uses of artificial intelligence today, but it's going to move much quicker than, let's say, personal computers did when they came on the scene in 80s. This is going to be much quicker, and I think part of the challenge is going to be as we bring this artificial brain power to basically everywhere. Also with it will come opportunities, economic development opportunities. And when those economic development opportunities require significant uses of energy, that creates, I think, a very significant challenge for our utilities and for ATC, for example. I mean, we have a grid, but when we have, and we know where the hotspots are now, we know where a lot of consumption is occurring right now and major loads. But with artificial intelligence, it could create lots of opportunity in lots of other places. So it's hard to plan for that. So I have great sympathy for our utilities and our line and poles and ATC, because it's going to be very difficult. So it's going to require some patience on all of our part. Local government will have to be somewhat accommodating to our utilities and the transmission that it needs to occur. We're going to have legislature play catch up on artificial intelligence and assist our energy sector in regulation or relaxed regulation to ensure that those who desire energy can get it. If we want to succeed as a state, if we want to position ourselves for success, if we want to have opportunities everywhere within our borders, one of the necessary ingredients is energy. So they need to get it. And with artificial intelligence, artificial brain power, it could happen pretty much anywhere. So it's a big challenge, and we're not ready for it yet. Not for lack of effort, but because it's coming on very, very quickly.
Okay, it occurs to me though that with demand, Todd talked about flat demand, and we in the earlier panel we talked about efficiencies or getting the consumer maybe to time their demand or to curb their demand, or maybe industrial users to curb their demand. Is there a way, or are we doomed to have ever increasing demand, or can we curb the demand at this and at the same time accept this new kind of demand? It's sort of a broad question, but it gets to how we would handle it. Todd, why don't we just start with you on that? Can your industrial, the people you represent, time their demand and curb their demand to help us accept a surge like this?
There are a number of things that we kind of already do. So I'll maybe talk about some of the things we're currently doing, and then maybe some suggestions for going forward. I mean, a lot of our member companies, particularly, I would say, the ones concentrated on the northeastern part of the state, Wisconsin Public Service customers, have some of the most interruptible load of any pound for pound for just about any utility in the country, really. And that's because you have a lot of paper and other big foundries and things like that, ones that can turn off if need be. And not that anybody really likes to be interrupted, but they will be on interruptible rates to we think that really helps the system if they're able to respond during times of high prices or when the grid is stressed. So that's something that's been tried and true for a long time. Going forward, if you believe that there might be more reliability challenges or higher prices or more volatility, you might see some customers wanting to get off those programs because they want to be firm. They don't want to be interrupted as much. And you've got others that are probably going to want to sign up for it too. So you're probably going to see a little bit of load going both ways on interruptible credits. So that's been tried and true for a long time. Obviously, I think it was talked about earlier. I missed some of the first panel due to another commitment, but I believe focus on energy was touched on. Our members generally like it. They are some of the biggest users of it. But they don't always like paying any more for it though either. I'll give you that caveat. So as long as they pay about what they do now, they do like it quite a bit. There are other things you can do with demand response and getting customers to respond, and depending on how much we want to talk about this, I don't want to filibuster, but there's some different things we can do going forward in that area. I would also, I probably should talk about some of the self-generation that's coming or has recently been we've been seeing quite a bit of. I've been really surprised. If you would have told me 5 years ago that some of our member companies are doing some of the solar projects of this size or partnering with the utilities of projects of this size, I probably would have said you're crazy 5 years ago. But we are seeing a number of folks, looking at 10, 15 megawatt solar projects, and batteries are probably coming next. And they're doing it for a variety of reasons. Some of it is their sustainability goals. Almost every company has sustainability goals these days, and even industries you'd think of as perhaps maybe not on the forefront of sustainability. Maybe they make a part buried in the middle of your car. They still are part of it because, a GM or a Toyota, they're trying to clean up their supply chain of carbon, and they're trying to get to net zero by 2050 or whatever. So you get a lot of pressure from your investors, maybe your parent company, maybe your biggest customers, that you need to meet these goals. And so, like I said, I've been very surprised by the number of companies that are actively working on some fairly large solar projects. And I think batteries is the next round to go along with that. And so some of that is partnering with the utility, some of that is behind the meter or that's on site. And so I'm getting some interesting calls that I never had to deal with before on how do you go about this, or, hey, my utility, says, oh, by the way, there's a number of roadblocks that often get thrown up at times. So that's been a surprise to me in recent years. And I think you're going to see a lot more of it as some companies maybe realize the sustainability goals or what they have to do, or they get a new customer or want a new customer that is demanding it. They're going out to either procure it somewhere or build it on site.
In terms of a couple of things Todd has mentioned there, I guess we could start with his worry about eating into reserve capacity and the dangers of that, but also affordability issues. So how does managing demand, how can the utilities curb that demand while accepting demand surges in new technologies?
There's an opportunity here too, and you were touching on it, Todd, that while interruptible rates pound for pound, it's functioned in the past. We have a reserve margin, of course, with the independent system operator that's being eaten into as we see demand spikes that we need to address. We'll work through that through resource adequacy and modeling, and talk about streamlining, I think, in the panel after this, and how important that's going to be through the regulatory processes. But there's also the on-site generation piece that you touched on, right? You said 10 to 15 megawatts. There's much larger ones that are 100 megawatts, and they want to, customers want to couple that up with battery energy storage systems. There's an opportunity to partner with the local utilities in service to those units, like WEC and ourselves, where perhaps that capacity can be accredited to the system as well and become a generation resource during times of need. The pace of change that we're in today, I like to say, is never going to be slower than it is at this moment, right? We're in this sea change moment, and with it, all this beneficial electrification, the cleaning up of our energy sources, and energy has now become, I think Jim Wood said it the other day when we were on the phone, the new oxygen. And I thought that was a really poignant way to put it. Everything that we do takes energy. So we're going to have to really work through our planning processes, our regulatory processes, and how we permit things with local government and with our customers, frankly, because I think that demand piece that you're talking about, Jeff, in order to respond to it, we have interruptible rates, we have economic buy-through opportunities that are going to have to be continued to be capitalized, and local, generation on site that I think is going to have to become an option, and customers want it more and more. So I think there's an opportunity to partner with the utilities in that endeavor.
Yeah, and really, I mean, the question in play here is when we talk about limitations, are certain customers willing to accept limits, impose limits on their operations to be able to take an incentive rate of some sort or to avoid some sort of infrastructure addition? If they're not, we have an obligation to serve. That's the kind of fundamental utility piece. We have an obligation to serve. Customers have an obligation to, pay fair rate for their service, and we have to make the longer term infrastructure decisions necessary to support how things are evolving. And as we've said, talked before, nobody can see exactly into the future, but the whole purpose of our discussion today, right, is positioning the state for success. And I think most communities welcome new investment, the jobs, the other things that are coming from these entrants, the new entrants in. And so, how can we best plan for the infrastructure to support them? And, one option, again, that I like to keep coming back to is, can we work with the state and the communities to define zones or other places where it makes sense for these entities to locate, that we can work together to plan the infrastructure for, so that when the opportunities come along, the infrastructure is there to support it. So lots of different questions, but it all boils down to obligation to serve. And if you want to consider differences to that, what are customers willing to accept as far as limitations? And then just from a high level perspective, ATC's job is to participate in keeping the grid up, the broad grid that Wisconsin is connected to, but doesn't stop at Wisconsin's borders. So part of what we have to do is be able to control resources and loads to be able to make sure that the grid can stay up. And so if we're depending on something that is not controllable, that becomes a challenge then in being able to run a grid to make sure the grid doesn't go down. So making the choice, if we're going to say, hey, we're going to control a demand issue with some sort of a curtailment or something like that, if we get to a point where the customer says, well, hey, I don't want that rate anymore, I don't want to be involved in a curtailment situation, I want 100% power, we may not have planned the system to allow for that to be able to happen. And that's where we're talking about getting into reserve margins and other things. It's really important that we plan for giving options to people to be able to operate the way they need to, and for us to be able to serve that reliably.
Okay, Bert, it's your turn.
Well, I guess one thing, I wouldn't view this issue as a curveball. I think it's an incredibly positive thing for the entire state of Wisconsin. I mean, a good economic development culture requires, whether it's good roads or reliability, it's usually two pillars. It's good infrastructure and good people. And we have both here. And I think this is a real opportunity for the state, particularly a utility like ours, to meet this challenge. And, Todd's correct. Demand, we've spent billions on energy efficiency since, Focus on Energy was started. So, I mean, it's a combination of economic activity and better investments in energy efficiency. That's a good story. And I think that with the Microsoft development and all the other activity in Southeast Wisconsin, we are actively working with our customers to develop a plan that's acceptable to regulators, is cost effective, and it will ensure reliability, because that is job number one. So I think it's an exciting time for our state. With these type of businesses that are attracted to Wisconsin. So I think that's been great. I also agree with Todd that, part of the issue is we're seeing a lot more customer-owned generation. That's part of the solution too. Customers taking this matter into their own hands and having more control themselves. I think on time of use and interruptible, that's always the big energy users that Todd represents and we serve. Are willing to take, whether it's market risk or interruption, that's what they're willing to do to help be part of the solution. I think when you look at residential time of use, I can't speak for you, Carl, but I mean, our retail customers, I've been here for 13 years. The time of use is minimal penetration. So it's not like we're seeing a big sea change where people are saying, sign me up for time of use. That's something, again, that's a consumer choice issue, but it's something I think to manage expectations, at least from our companies, we don't view that a big part of the solution right now. But like I said, energy efficiency, customers control that. They're part of helping manage this demand question.
What sort of other tools do you think utilities could use or be given, or or do incentives need to be upped, either through government funded or otherwise, to encourage more efficient use on the industrial level? What other kinds of tools are there out there?
Well, we've worked together with Todd and our customers to develop, the commission's been supportive of real-time pricing rates and other things that shift more of the risk to the largest energy users, and they're willing to take that market risk, and that's helps manage their load. So that's actually, I think, been something that's been extremely positive in the last 5 and 10 years. The commission's support and the willingness for some of our larger energy users to take advantage of these real-time pricing rates.
Mark, what do you think? Can government do more in this arena to handle demand, to curb demand at certain times? I mean, what can I mean, you're head of the counties, but what can government do better or more of?
Well, let me take a simplistic global economic perspective on this. If you take out regulation altogether, I mean, obviously we're not doing that, but if you took out regulation altogether, then the market would dictate demand, right? When there's higher demand, then there'd be higher price, and if it was too high, then people would not engage in that demand. Okay, that's one perspective. But is that where we want to be? I would suggest to you, no. Where we want to be as a state is if there is the idea of a demand, and AI is going to create demand very quickly, that we want to be ready for it. We want that capacity for it because that results in economic activity. What we really want as a state is more people making more money, engaging in more commerce, paying more in taxes at current or even lower rates, so we can take that money, invest in our community, make them attractive to the smart young talent that's going to fuel our economy in the future. We want that. Part of that, one of the necessary ingredients is energy. And with AI, the demand for energy is going to be very quick. It's not going to be, gee, we're going to have a big energy draw in 5 years, so maybe we should start thinking about building some lines and bringing in power from a particular source. It's not going to happen like that. It's going to happen very quickly. Like I want to build an operation and I plan to open doors in 60 days. I need the power. And we don't want to be the state that says, that's great. We can get you the power in about 36 months. We want to be the state to say, we have capacity and it will take us a little bit of ramp up, but we can do that. That's where we want to be. So from where I sit, I think our utilities, and I'm going to include ATC in this, have been incredibly positive corporate citizens, great partners with government and I guess all of commerce. We seem to get excited from time to time when we're going to build infrastructure related to energy, almost as if we have this, some people have this perspective that if we don't build it, then people won't consume it. That's fantasy. We're going to consume it. We're going to need more. And AI is going to require us to have that capacity, and it's going to fuel more and more economic activity. We want that as a state. So I would suggest as government, state and local, we need to take a broader, longer term view of the energy sector in our state and what it means as a necessary ingredient for economic success. So does that mean we need to have no regulation? Well, of course not. I mean, we're going to have a public service commission. They do an incredible job. I don't think our utilities, they have to bare their soul every time they want a 3-cent rate increase. So there's nothing untoward going on. People are paying a fair rate for the consumption of the energy that is being produced. And when our utilities want to build, they have to jump through a lot of hoops to do that. I would suggest we may have to be a little more futuristic, a little more visionary in that we anticipate we're going to need this kind of capacity in the future. So let's build it now so we're ready for it when it comes. And AI is going to constrict that timeline, I think, dramatically.
Todd is suggesting that our reserve capacity is under stress. So we would need to add capacity very quickly in order to handle what you're suggesting.
I would agree. We need to increase capacity. So when our utilities are asking for flexibility to generate and then to transmit, I think we have to think not 2-5 years out. We've got to think 10, 20, 40 years out.
So you just think there needs to be not mass deregulation. You think regulations need to be streamlined for adding capacity.
I would say that would something we should absolutely look at. I think that we need to provide some flexibility for to be ready for economic activity as AI is going to force us to get ready quickly. Or we cannot do that. And then 15 years from now, we can look at Utah and say, wow, look at what they've advanced, how their economy is booming because they were ready for AI and all the business that came with it. Maybe we can catch up to that someday. I don't want to be that state.
Okay. Carl, were you the one jumping in? Did I interrupt it?
I was, but I was really jumping in to climb on board the Mark O'Connell train. I think he, got the right words in the right order. I totally agree. We think about how things were. We were relatively flat, to Todd's point earlier on load growth. I remember in the 90s, we had an upward trajectory on load growth, and it makes a big difference on the economy of the state, frankly. And we want to stay ahead of that curve. Streamlining the regulatory processes and the permitting processes, that's important because we want to be able to meet that capacity, continually challenge the reserve notion of how much reserve you need to have on the system in order to be entirely reliable. These are all things that we need to do in order to continue to grow the state and meet the energy needs that are coming down the road. I don't see it, and Bert said it too, I hate to be a parrot, but that's the reality is that it's not a curveball. This is a good thing for the state of Wisconsin, and a lot of the tech companies like it here. We have low latency for data centers. We have access to a good workforce, and we have really good, reliable energy sources. So it's important. Let's capitalize on it. And let's keep our brain trust here in Wisconsin, so they're not all going to Utah, to use Mark's point, where the economy is booming.
So what is Carl? Maybe define a little bit. What are the 2 or 3 streamlining actions that would really be meaningful? Are they legislative? Are they PSC? Are they local legislation? What are the 2 or 3 things that really get in the way?
I think about the CPCN process, right? And the level at which you have to file for a CPCN, and going through that CPCN process is akin to bearing your soul, if you will. I heard somebody say that earlier. It's like a little rate case process. I think those limits at a minimum need to be moved up significantly so we can be more nimble and get that infrastructure built. From the generator side to the transmission side, even on the distribution side, if you go down one notch from CPCN, and I know these are acronyms that
No, but define your acronym for us.
Yeah, Certificate of Public Need and Necessity, and then the next level down is Construction Authority, and I think that's at 10 million. Well, those numbers, you can't build a substation anymore for about $10 million on the distribution side. So moving those triggers up at a minimum makes a significant difference in how quickly and how you be more nimble in responding to load growth, Jeff.
How about, Carl, I'm just going to stay with you. How about this idea that we talked about big companies, big users building their own generation, are there hurdles that could be eliminated for those folks?
Yeah, undoubtedly. Some of it's outside of our control, cleaning up the supply chain, access to battery sources. These are challenges that we're still coming out of from, frankly, the COVID-19 pandemic, but would make a difference in speed to market, getting access to solar arrays for, off-site or on-site rather, distributed solar additions. That makes a difference, local permitting. Any cleanup we can do on that front, and I'm not terribly familiar with what's out there, but any opportunities we can to improve that process, and then building out, frankly, if you have to upgrade your transmission system or your distribution system to take that energy off, that's, once again, it all comes down to infrastructure construction, how quickly you can do it.
Okay, Todd.
I guess I would just start out, my curveball comment is really more on the, it is so striking to go from no load growth for 20 years to, we now may have, I think as WEC Energy Group's projection, the investor slides last year are like, hey, we have 1% load growth. And now it's like, we got 4 to 5. Okay. I mean, that is an incredible change in a short period of time. And, I hope nobody thinks that I'm anti-economic development. Give me a break. I'm about as pro-economic development as you're going to get. So, I do, though, worry from this discussion. I'll just repeat a little bit, though. We've had high rates for 20 years, and folks, have been struggling with that for a long time. So I don't feel like we have a big margin of safety when it's like, hey, we got to let it rip and we need to start building like crazy. We're a little concerned about, the regulatory system we have now and using the infrastructure we currently have. As I said before, look, utilities have a lot of information that's confidential, and they're going to be a little bit ahead of the regulatory body and the stakeholders. But based on what's just public, some of these retirements are hitting at a time when MISO might be short, and that they might be short even without load growth.
Okay, so what are you saying, Todd?
That's just math. I mean, that's what you can look up in public.
No, so what are you saying that you want to slow the retirement
You
of?
might want to slow some of these retirements down.
Okay, and do you agree with what Carl said about upping the limits?
I would have to see. Well, first of all, we kind of have some of that now. I mean, threshold now is, I forget what it is, $15 million for a CA where you can fly under the radar. And so, I mean, we've seen, WEPCO in particular had a dozen small solar projects kind of, show up in the rate case that they didn't have to file a CA for that. So I think we already have that. We already have the 180 and the 180, so I think it may be using the resources we currently have. I missed a little bit of the earlier panel, but I think I did hear it. I mean, we really should look at this as kind of civil service reform. We really should look at paying the PSC better, having them have more staff, if need be, maybe dedicating more folks if there are going to be a lot more construction projects, dedicating more staff to that, or how we look at the set of commissioners and their duties as to how we look at it. But I mean, the pay scale for some of these positions compared to the private sector, I'm sorry, and they should be getting paid a lot more to retain them. I think some of the budget for the modeling software that they've had, I'm not sure that some of that modeling software has been purchased yet. I mean, it comes from ratepayer money. It's not taxpayer money, and ratepayers are happy to bolster the staff and help to focus on processing some of these things.
Okay, Todd, I want to just ask you again, you talked also about like changes to regulation. Is there some particular thing that your group or your the people you represent are really pushing for that you think would be a help now?
Well, since I just maybe touched on, there are a number of things we get into, but
Oh, yeah, give me some of
we
the
touched on
highlights.
it, but since I just mentioned some of it, I mean, the commission now has a number of functions that I would call like a state agency function, more of a kind of a Department of Commerce. They got broadband, they've got
Water.
grants to the Office of Energy Innovation and things like that. Those are more, what other state agencies often do. And, if you're under stress and strain from, kind of the economic regulation that you normally do, where rate cases, and construction cases, maybe bifurcate some of that.
Okay, so you're talking about like having, instead of narrowing the focus of the PSC to simply energy.
Or economic regulation, the construction and the rate cases and things like that. I mean, again, that's a suggestion. Getting folks paid more. I mean, some of the pay scales compared to the private sector, compared to what they can get for utility, or somewhere in the private sector for some of my companies, it's hard to keep folks on the farm, right? You
Okay.
get them all trained up, and they're going to be gone in a few years.
Okay, I think
To get projects through, that's
so. Okay, so a utility response, I think, is needed on this. I think Todd's mentioned a couple times about affordability, that he thinks rates have been too high. And I don't know the stats in terms of comparison to other neighboring states. What about rate pressure? And then, what about some of Todd's suggestions for helping to streamline things at the PSC? Bert, do you want to talk about the affordability issue?
Sure. I mean, this is an issue that's come up in every rate case since I've been with the company. And since when I was on the commission, there's always been a concern from our large energy users over rates. I mean, my argument is we're cost of service. We've attracted significant investment here. Customers pay bills, not rates, and we're trying to create the best environment for Todd's members and any customer, industrial customer, to come to Wisconsin. I guess on the like the previous panel, I'm a minimalist on legislation because I think, again, I come from a different perspective. Over the last 25 years, we made huge changes at the commission with the help of Governor Thompson, Governor Doyle, and the legislature to streamline the permitting process. And I think to Todd's point, it's more of a resource issue as we go through this transition. Or Carl maybe mentioned it. The concern is, it's retention of those employees that are at the PSC, but also their bandwidth to handle a number of things that have been foisted on them. And it's not just us. Carl and I are the only and Teresa. There's other utilities in the state that have a lot of important business in front of the commission too. So, it's the same people that are doing multiple tasks. That's a big risk for all of us, all the stakeholders. I think that's something Todd, Cub, Tom Content, Carl, Teresa, we can all agree with, that we want them to be paid appropriately. We want, like any employer, you want to retain your best employees, and we want them. When I was at the commission, everyone was 20 years older than me, and they'd spent 30 years. I think Todd's right. When we go out to commission meetings on Thursday, it's not just a function of our age, but they meet that profile of they're all flight risks. And Todd's right. I mean, you meet somebody, and 3 years later they've moved to Austin. So that's not good as an agency. But I don't have the answer today. I mean, it's a challenge for the commission. It will be a challenge, but I think I'm confident with the management team there. They'll do their best to keep the best and brightest. And it's an excellent staff. It's their bandwidth would be my concern. But
no, I think I've never heard this before, but maybe I'm not listening. This idea that the commission, the Public Service Commission, is been had, I think Todd he used the term foisted upon them, like this grant program, administer this, administer that, take care of things that are really I'm not saying they're not important, but maybe outside what we would view as the traditional role of the agency. Is that shared by everyone else here, that the PSC is I guess, its task list has grown too big?
Well, I'm not smart enough to know every position at the commission. I just know from the divisions we work with, which is in consumer affairs and the energy and the, the wholesale group. They're staffed. We just want to continue to, keep those people there like they do. So I don't know, Carl. I don't know
Carl,
if
do you share Todd's concern that there's too much foisted upon the agency?
I share the concern that they got a tough job. And I think the pay scales, you make a great point, honestly, need to be more equalized. I couldn't agree more, right? We're only as strong as those teams around us. It's not Bert and Teresa and Carl writing CPCN applications, and it's the staff that's reviewing these CPCN applications. And these are incredibly complex and extraordinarily important energy policy issues and infrastructure approvals. So retaining that talent is extraordinarily important, and I agree with Bert and Todd. Let's get it right. Let's make sure that they have the bandwidth and the FTEs, or the headcount rather, to be able to meet the burden that's in front of them. And not like Bert, I don't know all the things that have been foisted upon them, but they're certainly busy, and they're doing a good job pivoting to the substantial workload. But of course, we would support more help for them, because more help for them means speedier responses for us. So that might be a selfish comment, but it's true. So I agree with both Bert and Todd in that regard, and I'm sure Teresa does too.
Of all the things that government does in Wisconsin, one of the things we do better than pretty much anybody in the world is manage our retirement system. And we make very good money at it. Why is that? Because we have an incredibly well-staffed and very smart state of Wisconsin investment board with employees that we pay properly. There is very few substitutes for experience. On the Public Service Commission, I think they do a fantastic job, and they've got some very smart people, but they have a lot to do. It's sort of the mission sort of crept outward a little bit. So if we want to keep those people and hang on to the experience that we currently have and that we want the people to gain, you got to pay people to keep them, and we want to keep those folks. So yeah, I think that's something we need to look at and treating them a little bit differently, so we can, as Carl put it, make very good decisions quicker. So we have that capacity and we can have economic growth occur in this state.
And this is one of the most economic development agencies of all the state government, and very few people know about it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with the group here. A couple other thoughts. Carl mentioned before about the thresholds for CACPCN. We're talking about volume going through the commission. If we can find some reasonable ways to reduce the volume, that will also help. And so it's just saying, okay, we're in a period of significant growth that's important for the state economically. So is it appropriate to make some adjustments to the what we bring and in what detail we bring to the commission? That's one thing. Another thing could be considering doing some batching. A lot of times there's multiple facilities in the case of transmission that would be associated with any given driver. So can we batch these rather than bringing them all in separate dockets or in individual, applications? That might be a way to reduce the volume and create more efficiency in looking things over. And then another thing that I would really like to see in the state, if we're talking about legislation and opportunity, and kind of tying to what Mark said, that we want to attract these loads, we want to attract these expansionists to the state, and timing of energy infrastructure is a huge piece of that. So can we do something where we have some legislation that says, okay, let's work with the communities, the areas, et cetera, to figure out where we want to do some advanced infrastructure work, to say we've got some sites that are ready. And that creates then a need for the infrastructure that we could say, okay, here's the need, here's the infrastructure in response, put it through a process and get that going in a timely fashion so that then the communities, the counties, the others can say, hey, we've got these spots. We're working in partnership with our utilities. We've got the people who are ready to be your employees, et cetera.
Well, don't we have economic development zones now? Teresa?
Not allowing, not necessarily that are creating a need for infrastructure and saying this is a valid need, get building for it.
So, but okay, so let me use the example of Microsoft. Isn't Microsoft tapping into a Foxconn oriented development zone, and therefore there was an anticipation that there would have to be power pumping to the Foxconn site, or is that a bad analogy?
So and I wasn't in the state at the time of that particular one, but that's a one-time deal. That's not a full state
Okay.
look at opportunities and infrastructure to support all around the state. But that certainly was a potential, a key attractant for being able to move faster that may have helped to draw Microsoft in.
Okay, that's really interesting because I guess I thought we had WEDC, Mark O'Connell had enterprise zones, but energy wasn't a component of those, or energy delivery infrastructure.
I don't know the details of the enterprise zones, Jeff, but let me comment on what Teresa was talking about. In 1950, it might take you 3 years to move your operation from one place to another, from Wisconsin to Oklahoma. But in our new millennium knowledge technology-based economy, businesses can move almost overnight. And where are they going to go? Wherever they're going is ready for them. Whether it's smart young talent to populate their business and create economic activity, whether it's energy, whether it's transportation infrastructure, they're going to go where someone is ready. They're not as likely to go where someone can get ready in 18 months. So I mean, we still have companies that will take 18 months or 3 years to move, but there's a lot of business activity in this new millennium economy where you need to be ready. So
Right.
We need to be more proactive than reactive.
Okay, but this is really an interesting thing that Teresa brings up. I mean, again, I thought we had economic development zones, but I think you're talking about, Teresa, like creating hotspots. Here's a ready-made hotspot corporations. You can move in here and we'll deliver the goods to you.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. But the point is in, my prior comments about it takes a long time to build transmission, to go through all the process. If we can accelerate that by saying, yeah, we want transmission here because this is where we'd like to have data centers connecting or whatever the type of load that we might be looking for. That helps us get that certainty and, okay, what are we planning for? What's the right facilities to put in? And then let's get through that process of going through the commission and all the local permitting and everything else to be able to get those in. Because otherwise we cannot respond in a timely fashion for very large increases in load.
So is there a model for this existing somewhere, or could Wisconsin create such a model, I guess?
I don't know that there is something specific for a load like this. I know some states have done things for generation when they say we want to attract renewable generation to certain areas. We want to build transmission to help support that. But it's kind of this build it and they will come concept, making it right for this state in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there is a new proposal in Illinois to do some ready-made prep for data centers or chip makers. So, but anyway, so the race is on, I guess. We have a question here, chat with questions, but this question has been on my list anyway, so I'm going to bring it up now. The question is from Leon Ostrowski. Could small nuke plants be a feasible solution to cope with the AI rapid growth need located near data centers and their large need for cooling? So again, could the small nuke concept be helpful?
Yeah, I guess I'll take that. I mean, the industry, generic, we as an industry and as a company, everyone is looking at small modular reactors, SMRs, because as we go through this transition, there's a lot of interest in nuclear, but nobody wants to be, no one on the management team wants to be version 001. So NuScale, that was a very disappointing development. They had lined up financing. We're going to proceed with the project in the West, I think Utah, and then their financing fell through. So I think there may have to be some government intervention on version 001. That's just my opinion. I'm not speaking for the company, just following the industry. But for energy security, if we're going to meet our climate goals, you know, we talked in the earlier panel, we're all going to get to 80% by the end of this decade of reduction, assuming, you know, we get approvals from the commission. All the utilities, you know, Carl's company, everyone sort of has the same goal. The issue is the last 20%. How are you going to lower your CO2? And in the absence of any new technology, that nuclear as a country, you know, that's something we're going to have to get our arms around with to get to the ultimate goal, absent some other technology, hydrogen or something else. But it's a very interesting thing. It's something, you know, a lot of companies, given the experience Southern had, they do not want to have the cost overruns they experience, and that's why SMRs are much more attractive. They're smaller. You're not betting your financial future on that particular generating facility, and it's a carbon-free baseload asset. So it's very appealing. It's just who's going to go first.
Didn't Dairyland have some sort of deal to test these?
Well, there's a coalition. There's, I mean, Excel, I mean, a number of companies are looking at this, but there's a big difference between a study versus, you know, going to the regulator and saying, this is now in our capital plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Carl, what do you think of the idea of a small nukes being a possible solution?
I think Bert hit the nail on the head. He mentioned NuScale. That's exactly what I was going to lead out with, a bit of a disappointing development. There is a coalition to study it. I think it's important. I'm very pro-nuclear. We have a couple of nuclear units on the Minnesota side of the border. Everybody's weary of version, you know, 0.01. Of course, it's tough being first in the breach, and you want to get it right because, you know, that's what we all strive to do. But I think it is going to be an important part of closing that last 20% gap. Oftentimes, I know that, well, I shouldn't say oftentimes, I know that there's some potential promising developments with, don't quote me on this, but I think it's Westinghouse and maybe GE on some new tech on the SMR side, and I'm by no means a nuclear engineer. But we're watching that closely and participating where we get the opportunity to participate. And again, I agree with Bert on, you know, there may be a need for some support from others on getting it jump started. And there's a lot of precedents for making that happen in the energy industry. So yeah, very, I guess you'd say bullish on the nuclear side.
Mm-hmm. Todd, what do you think your members think about that?
Well, you know, based on the conversation this morning, you'd be surprised to know, I think I pretty much agree with my utility friends on this one. I don't think customers want them to, somebody else should go first. You know, when I did my MBA and whatnot, first mover wasn't always for me. I think, especially in the energy world, let somebody else go first. I love the idea of nuclear, and I think, you know, I would love for this to be the solution, but I'm not sure we want Wisconsin to go first. And as you know, I blanch a little bit, you would have to be very heavily subsidized, and hopefully not subsidized by Wisconsin ratepayers, because you know, as some of the folks on this panel know, I mean, the existing nuclear issue right now that we have, you know, we still have Point Beach here providing very good, reliable power. It's just very expensive right now, and it, you know, it drives up our fuel costs every year. So I wish, you know, we could do a blend and extend and save us on that cost, because it's whatever it is right now, 66, 67 bucks a megawatt hour for that power on that contract. So I love the idea long term of nuclear. I wouldn't want us going first.
I think this falls, well, innovation and creativity are sometimes lonely partners. So it falls into the category of everyone is always very happy to be the first to be second. So if we're going to engage in this, which I think is a very viable option in our array of energy generation options or sources, if we're going to do it, then we have to remove some of the risk that a private entity would experience, which means government would have to, hold hands real tightly with the private sector to remove some of that risk. So if being first doesn't work out exactly as planned, there is not a more people would pay the price. If you put it all on one entity, it's be very difficult for that entity to make a decision to be the very first one with all of the risk. So we have to find a way to remove that, and I think government would be part of that solution.
And the questioner hints at using the experience of the U.S. Navy when they're using the SMRs for aircraft carriers. That could be jump-starting the technology. But I think that goes to Mark's point. New technologies often need big government incentives before they become commonplace or adaptable. So maybe this is where government intervention really does come into play. Okay, I guess I want to close this out. I want to get everybody's closing, circle back to the whole demand question and what, fill in some of the gaps about how we can cope with demand surge or limiting conventional demand to accommodate the surge.
Our objective as utilities, and really everybody here, is to help Wisconsin be successful, help position Wisconsin to attract the right kind of demand and to manage it appropriately for the benefit of all the customers. And so I've said a number of times that from a transmission utility perspective, time is not our friend. Things take a long time. The more we can get ahead of things from a transmission perspective, the better. So I would really advocate for doing what we can to be proactive in that planning from the energy perspective, and then combine that with the streamlining of the regulatory process so that we can get done what needs to get done. And then we can be a partner to our communities and serving the demand that wants to come here.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa. Really appreciate you being on 2 panels back to back. Your insight has been very, very good. And also to Bert, who's had to do double duty too. Bert, what's your closing remarks, closing observations on the demand issue?
Well, I mean, the short answer is we're going to meet it. And that's what our 5-year capital plan is designed to do, to keep, it's part of our affordability, reliability, and clean. Those are the 3 objectives we have. And, we're working, we don't operate in a vacuum. We're working with our customers, with the commission, and a host of other stakeholders as we execute this, because this is a very transparent process. And the one thing that's changed since I was on the commission is the staff has the same dials we have in these generation planning tools as they look at the future, and they can disagree with it and say, I'm changing this. So I just want to close with where we're looking forward to working with CUB, WIG, the commission as we execute this and we meet the demand together. Because like Carl said, it's this whole team of people that, regardless of the utility, are working to make this happen, and we're going to do it.
So thank you, Jeff. I just wanted to see if there were any points that I didn't raise, because we had, this was a good panel, a lot of good points, and I'm sure we probably could have talked for a lot longer. Some of the stuff that I did not bring up, maybe was probably brought up in the panel before me, but obviously the stranded asset issue was one that I think is going to have some conversation this next year, and we're concerned, as I said earlier, we're concerned about some of these plants and the reserve margins right now, and shutting stuff down, and that still has sometimes decades of life left in it. So I think that's a conversation we'll probably hear quite a bit about in the next year. Some of the ideas that did not quite get to, but going forward, there are some demand response things that other utilities do that maybe we don't have here that again can be an ongoing conversation. There are things with demand response interruptibles that other states have done, and maybe these comes up in rate cases this year. I don't know, but you can aggregate some of these demand response or even some of the resources. It's not for everybody, but there is some version of push button interruptible. Again, it's not for everyone. The price has to be right, but even more instantaneous interruptible service. Again, that's not for everybody. Not everybody can do that. And but it is a thought. Having things retail rate pilots in general, industry is, as has been said, industry is very mobile. It's getting even more mobile. And we don't want to lose out to other states or other areas because of, high rates. So I think we need to look at a comprehensive, holistic, big picture, optimizing as much as we can. And I'll just close. I'll give kudos to Carl on looking at your IRP in Minnesota. You got a goal of keeping your rates to 1% or less for the next whatever through 2040. I appreciate that. I wish every utility in the state had a goal of keeping it to 1% or less through 2040.
Well, thanks, Todd.
Carl, what's your overall closing remarks, your views on the demand issue?
Yeah, well, it'll be hard to differentiate myself from Bert and Teresa, but listen, we got to do this together, right? And we're not always going to be at the table nodding in agreement. And we all certainly understand that. We can look at the options, the push button option that Todd just mentioned. The utilities, there's one thing I know about all the utilities in the state of Wisconsin, including MG&E and Alliant, who aren't on this panel with us, but Bert and Teresa know we're all pretty good at working together when it comes to solving a problem that affects everybody and where we have an opportunity to benefit the whole state. So let's do more things like this and talk and be transparent and look for those options to improve. Maybe it's batching up major transmission projects, to Teresa's point. Maybe it's looking at new demand response options that can complement the existing demand response options to get a bigger lever so we can meet that new AI demand. And of course, we also have to, at some point, we got to talk about the residential customers and what they can do to help alleviate the pressure on the system as well, because undoubtedly there's levers that need to be pulled on that side, or that could be pulled on that side. So Tom Content and Citizens Utility Board and Clean, there's a lot of stakeholders, and we have a lot of history of working well together. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, this is a cooperative venture. Okay, Mark, close it out with your views on the demand issue.
So first off, our energy industry in this state has been incredibly responsive to citizens and businesses. We don't have the challenges that California has, where sometimes you have to wonder if the light will go on or not. We don't have that. Our energy industry has been very good, and quite frankly, sometimes I'm not sure how they do it, but they do whatever it takes to ensure that we continue to have energy in this state. From a county perspective, if counties are going to be successful in maintaining this delicate fabric of society, we need a very vibrant, successful private sector. For the private sector to be successful, they need certain things: a quality workforce that wants to live here and enjoys quality of life, available capital to invest, grow, even risk, and a good infrastructure. Soft infrastructure like broadband everywhere you can breathe, and hard infrastructure like transportation and energy. So we want that as county government. To Teresa's point, if we are able to make sort of the intellectual leap and be much more proactive and visionary and get ready for what AI or how quickly economic activity could occur, we become a more attractive place for business to occur, for a vibrant private sector, and then for counties to be successful in maintaining a quality society, which then is also attractive to talent, which will fuel the private sector. That kind of a cycle is sustainable, and we want that to happen. So if we were going to do, if my final thought, I guess, would be, I think if we're able to fashion a more proactive, visionary approach, and a little less of a reactive approach. I'm not saying we're only reactive, but a much more visionary and proactive, so that we're ready for the next big thing that could occur. AI is big things everywhere. I think our state is better positioned.
All right. Well, it's been a great panel. I mean, I enjoyed this, the future looking, problem solving aspect of it. I think we had tossed around some great ideas, and maybe something will come of all of them. So I want to thank Todd Stewart of WIEG, Teresa Mogensen of ATC, Bert Garvin of WEC Energy Group, Carl Hosley of XL Energy, and Mark O'Connell of the Counties Association in Competitive Wisconsin.